we're going to start with vocabulary, which is a very fun skill to work on. Some general principles to remember when you're teaching vocabulary. Vocabulary words need to be taught in context. So you can think of the brain as this a bunch of walls, and we need hooks to stick new words on. And so when we give context, we give those hooks that help learners to connect the words to information. So if you give learners just a long list of words, they're not going to remember them. They need a lot of activities to reinforce those words so that they'll remember them. Again, they need to be taught a few at a time. So if you're trying to teach more than 10 new vocabulary words in a session, that's probably going to overwhelm the learners. So try to keep the number of new vocabulary words as small as possible, maybe 5 words per session, 10 would be the top. And then help them to be relevant and practical to their lives. So if there are words that you don't use or see very often, and they just happen to come up in something that you're doing, maybe just define it, but don't focus on it as something that you want the learner to remember. The basic principle with vocabulary learning that you need to remember is that a learner needs to retrieve the vocabulary word 10 times minimum in order to remember that word. So they need to interact with the word multiple times. If they only see it once or twice or do 1 or 2 small activities with a new word, they won't remember it. They most likely won't remember it. So here's a continuum of how you might know a vocabulary word or not know a vocabulary word. You might ask the learner if they've ever seen the word before, and they'll say, no, I've never seen it. The interesting thing is you might say, okay, well, this was in the textbook 2 weeks ago, and we actually spent 5 minutes on this word, but they won't remember seeing it. They'll say, no, I've never seen it, unless they've had those retrievals. The next level is, oh, yes, I've seen or heard that word before, but I don't actually know what it means. The next one would be I understand when I read or I hear the word, not heard, but I can't use it yet. And this is similar in our first language. We have a lot of words that we understand when we read or hear them, but we don't actually have them in our productive vocabulary. Then there's the step of use with uncertainty. This is one of my favorites when I'm learning another language. All of a sudden, a word will come out of my mouth, and I think, I don't even know if that's the right word. And then I wait to see if the person I'm speaking with seems to understand and seems like this is the right word. And then there's that sense of success when it seems like I used a word correctly that I was really uncertain about. The next step would be I can use it in one. I can use it in speaking or I can use it in writing. This might be, I don't know how to spell the word, so I can't use it in writing. Or I understand it when I read it, but I don't know how to pronounce the word. And then to truly know a word, I can use it with confidence in both speaking and writing. So learners will be all across this continuum with different vocabulary words. And we want to help move them towards, obviously, the right side where they can confidently use in both speaking and writing. So one of the questions you might have is how to choose words. And if you are using a text, I found that this text analyzer that you can find at this Road to Grammar website is quite helpful. So if you're using a worksheet or a textbook and you plug in your text, if you've gotten something from the internet, it's even easier because you can just copy and paste it into the box, and then it will tell you what words to focus on. It will also tell you what level the text is at. So this uses the common European frame of reference. Don't worry too much about that. It's very common in Europe for them to look at this and say, okay, if you're in Spanish, if you're in Italian, whatever language, they'll analyze it. And you can use these levels. For you, if you don't want to understand all of the levels of the common European frame of reference, what you can do is you can say, okay, here's the textbook we're using, or here's a worksheet that I know they can do. I plug it in, I see what level it is, and it tells me A2. A2 translates to a beginning high or novice high level. And then I can look at other things I want to use with those same learners, and I can plug those in and I can say, oh, they're testing at the same level. And this is specific to vocabulary especially, but I think it's a helpful tool if you want to see, okay, what words can I focus on? I really don't know even where to start. So you plug it into that box you see on the left, and on the right, those are the results you would get. And it would tell you the words that it's suggesting that you focus on. So when you're working with beginner level learners, how can you set the context and help them with vocabulary? Some ideas that we'll look at are theme pictures, objects, acting out words, introducing vocabulary in groupings like opposites and themes. Also, when you're introducing any new word for beginners, spell it out, write it down on the board or on a piece of paper so they can see what the word looks like. This will help them later when they're trying to spell the word. Another tip for beginners is don't just teach the word, teach other words that go with that word, because beginners really struggle to put language together in chunks. They might know a lot of random vocabulary words, but they don't know how to put that into a phrase or a sentence to communicate what they want to. So you could teach the article, like a book or an apple with it. You could also teach a verb when you're teaching a noun, for example, like open doors or deposit money or drink milk. These collocations, or these words that go together, will help them then to have a chunk of language that they can use, which is much more useful than just a random word. So we can also use our sentence frames, which we talked about a little bit in the first training. So we could say, do you like? And they could have cards that we've made, like to dance. So we're giving them all the language that goes around it and helping them to focus just on the vocabulary. And then we can put them into pairs and they can say, do you like to dance? Yes, I do. No, I don't like to dance. This is why I don't like to dance. Personally, it's because I have no rhythm. And they can have conversations about dancing and hiking and gardening. And you could make these specific to who your learners are. And these cards I created in Canva. I mentioned Canva before because it's free and it creates great things, but you can also have your learners create their own cards. They can just draw the pictures. You could draw it on the board. If you don't have a way to print them out or don't have the time to create cards, you can create them there in your session. Another beginning level activity that I like is the concentration game. I'm guessing maybe many of you are familiar with this. So you would take these cards, again, created in Canva, and cut them out and place them face down on the table. And then the learner has to pick up the boots, the picture of boots, and find the word boots. But they're all face down, so they don't know where those are. And then eventually they try to match all of the words that they're focusing on. It's very simple, but it gets them active. And once you have the cards made, you can use them for a number of different activities, which we'll see on the next few slides. So another simple activity is dictation or copying. You might think, well, that sounds boring, but spelling's really hard. So you might have them simply write the word 5 times, or you might say the word and have them write it down to see how they spell it, and then show them how to fix the spelling and then have them write it 5 times. Word maps, which is what we're seeing up in the upper right-hand corner. You put the vocabulary word in a circle, and then you have them tell you other words that relate to that word. This is good because usually you have groups if you have more than a few learners together, and those other learners might be just slightly ahead. And then they can share vocabulary that's close to the level of the lower level learners in your group. Slap, is this a familiar game? You can also play this with a fly swatter. So I go again to the dollar store and I get a little package of 3 fly swatters that are never used on flies. And then I can lay out my vocabulary cards that we've just created, like we used for the concentration game, for example. And then I say the word boots. And then whoever can use their hand to slap or use the fly swatter. There's something about the fly swatter that's very fun for adult learners too. Another way to do this is to write the words up on the board. And then when they hear the word, whoever slaps the word first, you have 2 people up there, then they can win the card. Something with a little bit of fun as they learn vocabulary. Word search puzzles online. There's so many free sites that will create a word search for you, that will create a crossword puzzle for you. For crosswords, one of my favorites is the Crossword Labs. Bingo card, you can see one I created with our to hike and sing and dance words. And then another little one, if you have extra time, is snowman, which used to be called hangman, but since a number of our learners come from potentially refugee situations, we're not encouraged to use hangman. So try maybe drawing a snowman and have them just work with the vocabulary. So very simple games, but they're fun. And one of our principles we talked about in the first training was that we want learners to come and enjoy the sessions. And these are enjoyable. They can take home a word search puzzle or a crossword puzzle, and they could practice between sessions. They could even take home copying, or that could be their assignment, write these words 10 times. It's not difficult, but it helps them to internalize those internalize those vocabulary words. Another one that I like is pair dictation. So you can put vocabulary words here. So number 1 is the first vocabulary word, and they have to write on their card. So A would say the vocabulary word. Let's say it's our word boots. They might have under their number 1 boots, and then the person B would have to write boots for number 1. So they can't see, person A is not showing their card to person B, and person B is not showing to A. So they go back and forth and they dictate to each other. This is phone numbers. So they can practice, where do you pause when giving a phone number, and share the phone numbers. So pair dictation is good. It's considered an information gap activity. It means that person 1 has information that you don't have, and person 2 needs that information, and then vice versa. So this is more like real communication, and it helps you to be engaged in what's happening. Another way with beginner learners is to introduce opposites. Maybe we can use the chat really quick for these. So what is the opposite of bad? Go ahead and type that in our chat. Laura wins for first response. Great. Everyone got good. And clean, the opposite of that one. Very good, Esther. And easy. Great. And empty. Full. I like that. Okay, new. And short. I like that we got tall and long because they're both right. So we can also talk about that, and when do we use tall and when do we use long? Another great way for beginning learners is to use total physical response. Although you might not be familiar with TPR, as it's known for short, or total physical response, I think you're all familiar with Simon Says, which is very similar to TPR. TPR is really good for teaching listening skills. You can work with verbs. It helps reinforce vocabulary, and it also is a relaxing break, so students can move around a little bit. So your screens are not on, but I will trust that you're going to try these. So stand up, sit down, hold up 8 fingers. I didn't stand up. I am sitting down. I should have put on a scarf. So pretend to put on a scarf. And I'm showing you here how they can become more complex if you have more advanced learners. If you can speak Spanish, clap your hands once. If you're wearing blue, raise your hand so you can change these based on what you're learning in the sessions too. If you like pizza, pretend to eat a slice and pretend to laugh at a joke. So TPR is fun. It also helps you to see who understands what you're saying, because if they don't stand up, if they don't hold up 8 fingers, you can see that their listening comprehension is potentially having a problem, but you can also put your vocabulary into TPR activities and help them by physically connecting the vocabulary with some kind of movement. And that'll help them to remember it in the future. Another technique that we can use with vocabulary is theme pictures. So you show the learner a picture. This could be something if you have a computer screen, or you could print something off, and it should have a lot of vocabulary potential and conversation potential in it. Then you ask them the words and phrases that they already know. What do they see in this picture? What might they connect this picture with? What words would they connect the picture with? As they're calling those words out, you write them on the board or on a piece of paper. Then you might define the vocabulary words that they're calling out if there's some that some in the group don't know. Usually if it's a picture, they can see it, so it's a little bit easier, but you might point out any words that you think they might be confused about. And then afterwards, reinforce with activities. So let's see what this looks like. This picture, again, from Canva. So what do you see here? We can use the chat. What are some of the words that you think the learners might call out when they see this picture? Police, good. Car, ticket, driver, great words. And you could introduce some words if they don't come up with some other ones. Fear, I like that. Not that I want you to be afraid. Driver's license, exactly. So you could have a list that you would like them to have. Problem, good. So this is such a great theme picture for our learners, because everyone maybe has a little bit of fear when they're pulled over by the police. But depending on who your learners are, maybe they don't know the procedure in the United States if they haven't been in the United States for very long. So when I was teaching at a community college, one of my students came to me on Monday and I said, "Oh, how was your weekend?" And he said, "Oh, I was pulled over." And I said, "Oh, tell me about it. What happened? What were you doing?" He says, "Well, in my country, when you're pulled over, you get out and you walk towards the car, the police car that pulled you over." I was like, "Oh, okay. So you got out and you walked towards the police car. And how did that go?" He said, "They yelled at me." I was like, "Yeah, it's very dangerous." So you can walk through with English language learners. Okay, what do you do exactly when you're pulled over? Where are your hands? What are they going to ask for? All of these things are not just important language features, they're important for keeping our learners safe. So now we have the vocabulary, and then we want to talk about, what does this conversation look like? And beyond that, like I said, we'll do the conversation first, but then also, what should you do physically? What should you do in this situation? And then potentially even, what are your rights if something happens? So there's a prototypical sort of conversation that happens when you're pulled over. So in your breakout room, we're going to put you in breakout rooms with about 4 people. I want you to come up with this conversation. What do you think? And you can have one of you designated as the reporter, and then when we get back, you could type that conversation out for us. What do you think the officer starts by saying? What does the driver say back? Then how does this conversation go? And then also thinking about theme pictures. What other theme pictures could you use that could build into an entire lesson with lots of vocabulary, but it's beyond that, right? We're moving into speaking and listening and other skills. So I'm going to go ahead and put you in the breakout room. And again, come up with a conversation. What does it look like? And then number 2, what other theme pictures could you use? So I'll go ahead and invite you into a breakout room I'll give you 4 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. So in the chat, please first share how you think the typical conversation goes. What does the officer say first? Good. Stay in the car. Do you know why I pulled you over? Do you know why I stopped you? Good advice. Keep your hands on the wheel. The reason I pulled you over is because of that. So good. And then what does the driver usually say when the officer asks, let's say the question, do you know why I pulled you over? No. What did I do wrong? Okay. I'm not sure. Please tell me. These are all good. Okay. And then the officer might say, you were driving 10 miles over the speed limit. The driver responds, maybe I'm sorry. And then we have another, please show me your license and registration, something like that. And so we could walk through the way this conversation looks, and we can have our learners practice this conversation. We can act it out where they practice keeping their hands on the wheel. We can talk about how it feels. They can share stories. In our breakout room, we had some fun stories about why people had been pulled over. So this vocabulary lesson could blossom into an entire time together. Some other activities that you probably maybe have already used with learners is incorporating music. So you can look on YouTube and come up with simple things. If they're really low-level learners, it might be something like the days of the week set to a tune of Clementine. We don't want our adult learners to feel like children, but oftentimes learners connect with music, and it's easier for them to remember vocabulary that way. They could also listen to a more advanced song and follow along with a handout, and you can leave words blank and they can write those words in. So music can help them with vocabulary, first noticing the vocabulary in something like a song and then working on spelling it and using it. Some other fun vocabulary activities include vocabulary sweep up. So you give the students, the learners, a set amount of time and they can sweep up as many of those cards. So if you've made those flashcards as they can in that time, and how they sweep might be that they create a sentence using the words. So I'm wearing boots today. Okay, that I used my boot vocabulary in a sentence, so I get to sweep up that card. Because remember, we need our learners to interact with these words maybe 10 times, 15 times. So we need to find creative ways to keep them interacting with the words. Another one is back to the board or headbands, if you're familiar with that one. You could write the word behind the learner and you have one learner facing the other learners if you have a small group. And then they have to, the learners who are in front, not with their back to the board, have to explain to the person what the word is. And you could also do it with headbands where they hold up their vocabulary card that you've previously created, and they have to explain what that word is. So these are fun ways to practice. The vocabulary quilt is another idea, and you could create your own quilt. I borrowed this one from a website called the ESL Girl, and she has a choice activity. So you give the learners the words and then they can choose what they want to do with it, like define it, draw it, act it out. Just a fun way to interact with the words. If you were here last time, you know I like my dollar store dice. So with the vocabulary, you can also play with the dice. So you simply hand out this worksheet, and then every single time you're working with new vocabulary, a partner, two people together could roll the dice, and then with the word that they get, so boots would be our first one. If they get a 1, they have to define the word. If they get a 2, they have to create a sentence. If they get a 3, they have to spell it out loud. If they get a 4, they have to act it out. You can see what they do with a 5 or a 6. So you have them practice with their partner, taking turns rolling the dice. And then with the word boots, each person has rolled the dice once and done something different with the vocabulary word. For intermediate learners, a little bit higher level, you could have them categorize the words. So create headings and place the words under those headings on a worksheet. You can have them explain the words to each other. So they pick up their card and then they have to explain it and get the other person to guess what that word is. You could play also something like password, where you have off-limit words. So if we're working with a utility bill, you could create a password-like game with balance. They can't use the words pay or total, and they have to get their partner to guess the word balance. Word maps can also be used for intermediate learners, where they connect the word with other words. Because remember, we want them to have that context with words. And for more advanced learners, you can also bring in idioms as part of this bigger category of vocabulary. Idioms, do not overwhelm them. I had a Chinese tutor once who thought we would spend an hour and a half or 2 hours on idioms every time we met. They're not going to remember that many idioms. So 1 or 2 is a lot per session, but you might even, if you have in a more advanced group, you might have an idiom of the day or something like that. Yeah, so think about one of these idioms that I have below, and think, when do you use this idiom? And then how would you explain the meaning? So let's look at the first one, and you can use the chat for this one. To push over the edge. When do you use that? And what does it mean? So in the chat, tell me. Oh, don't spend more than you have. So you might give them a few examples of when in a sentence, you can say, I was really tired, and then I came home and I found that my cat had destroyed this and it just pushed me over the edge. So I give them a few examples of where I felt pushed over the edge. Another one there is to be broke. Idioms are really helpful to learn for our more advanced learners, especially lower level learners. You could try some simple idioms, and then again, bring them up, help them to retrieve them a number of times too, because if they only hear them once or twice, they won't remember them. So when we're teaching vocabulary, first, of course, introduce that vocabulary in context, something like a theme picture, or what are the opposites of that word, or how might this vocabulary work in a setting? Then model, say the word or phrase several times so that the learners can listen to how it's pronounced. Then have them repeat it after you, and then give them multiple times to produce that vocabulary, and not just the one session, but the next session, bring it back up. You might give them little vocabulary quizzes. So the next time you say, okay, these are our 5 vocabulary words, and you're going to have a quiz about how to spell them and maybe how to define them the next time. So there's a little bit of pressure for them, but you're going to do 5 or 10 of these simple activities that don't really take that much time. And here's an example of, these are intermediate level students. So these words are obviously harder. So you can see, again, last time we talked about using an English Learner's Dictionary. So these definitions come from an English Learner's Dictionary, like the Longman Dictionary. And then I could do this with handwriting, or I can print them out and cut them up. So the first activity, they get a little packet with the words and the definitions mixed up, and then they have to match the word and the definition. So they could work with a partner and they can match the word or the definition. That's their first activity. And we can check as a class, okay, did we get all the right words with the right definitions? Then I have them maybe make their own flashcards. Then we could play a game of slap, where I say the word and they have to slap it. Then they could play a partner game or do a partner activity. Games sound like they're not learning, but actually this is what we're doing, right? We're pushing them to learn, to retrieve the word and the definition and to explain it. So guess the word would be, I have to describe what that word is, and then the partner would guess what word I'm describing. And then we could end our fifth activity with the sweep up, where they have to create a sentence for the words. And if they can within those the 2 minutes, maybe I give them a little bit longer, or 1 minute, then they get to sweep up that card. And so we have 5 different activities just with these vocabulary words. And I didn't need anything extra. We could do any of the other activities we talked about, like the dice roll too. So do we have any questions about vocabulary or any other ideas? I know we have a talented group that's tuned in for this session. So in the chat, if you have any other great vocabulary teaching ideas, or if you have a quick question, you can go ahead and put that in the chat. Okay, I'll give you 30 more seconds. Oh, charades. Charades is always fun. I make the students, once they call out the word, I then make them use it in a sentence too, just to give them a little extra practice with charades. Okay, well, we'll see if any others come up, but let's move now from vocabulary to listening and speaking. Looks like just when I said that. Do flashcards where one spells the word and the other figures out the word. I like that. And 20 objects. Oh, that sounds like fun too. Okay, so let's move to listening and speaking, which is also called conversation if we put them together. So learners need practice in both. We tend to emphasize speaking and not focus as much on listening. Both skills are definitely needed to feel successful with language outside of a tutoring session. Some general principles to think about with speaking and listening, and as you tutor, try to monitor your own speech for speed and complexity. So I think we have, some of us talk faster than others. So if you are a fast talker, you might need to write at the top of your paper that you bring with you to your tutoring session to slow down and speak a little bit slower. And then also not use so many idioms, not use extremely advanced vocabulary if you have lower level learners. But please avoid a super childish tone. It's interesting because I've observed a lot of tutors and teachers over the years, and sometimes we can talk down to especially lower level adults. And I'll hear like a kindergarten or a baby voice come out. Don't do that. They're adults still, even if their English level is lower. We don't want to treat them like they're children, even if their level is more similar to a child in the language that they're learning. They're not children. Don't speak too fast. I already mentioned that. Also, don't use incorrect grammar. And by this, I mean, if English is not your first language and you're tutoring because you're quite fluent, that is amazing. And if you make a grammar mistake, no problem. There's like a special English that we can do where we start leaving out words because we think, oh, if I simplify my speech, then they're going to understand me. But this is a terrible model for them. So don't start speaking a special English where you say, I go store. No, I go to the store. We want to use all of the grammar that's correct in that sentence. But I think it's pretty common to think, okay, if I simplify my speech and leave out these words, they're going to understand me better. No, it's not going to really help with understanding. And also it's just a bad model, because then they think that's the way the sentence is created. That's the way the grammar is. So with both listening and speaking, remember that learners need a lot of repetition. So we want to start with supported practice. Looks like it stopped saving when I was writing practice there. Sorry about that. So give them a lot of support in the beginning, especially with speaking. And then later they need less structure, and they need to be able to have more free conversation. And I'll explain this as we go through the slides. So I might give them those sentence frames in the beginning, and then we practice with the sentence frames, and we practice with the sentence frames, and then we practice without the sentence frames. And we have a real conversation where they're interacting back and forth. So we want to start with that structure and then take that away. For speaking, the learners need to focus on both fluency and accuracy. To be understood, you need both. So fluency means I can speak freely without having to stop and think. And accuracy is I'm using correct grammar and my pronunciation is intelligible. So let's look at how we can promote those in a tutoring session. For fluency, use materials or content that the learner already knows. So grammar and vocabulary that they learned the last time and the time before that, that might be even a little bit easy for them now, but that helps build fluency because they don't have to think so hard about the grammar and vocabulary. They already know it. So you might have some warm-up activities that recycle that content from the previous sessions, and that's going to help them with fluency. Repeat things more times than you think. Your learners aren't going to be bored if they repeat an activity. It's really helpful for them. Give them a little bit of pressure to do something faster. This helps them to become more fluent. And this can be making it a game. Okay, you did this in 1 minute. Now I want you to do it in 45 seconds. And then you can also provide them support. So on the board, you could have some language support, like a sentence frame, or you could have content words or vocabulary words, or some kind of support that they might need depending on the activity. And that's going to help them to be a little bit more fluent because they don't have to think about those things. They can see them, they can use them immediately. You can also do like a think pair share. This is, they think first on their own. You say, okay, I'm going to give you 60 seconds. Just think about the answer to this question and then share with your partner. Then I'll call on you to share with the whole group. Or even if it's just two people in a one-on-one session, I'm going to give you 30 seconds to think about this before you have to give me an answer. Thinking will help them to be more fluent when they actually share. Here's a fun fluency activity. It's called 432. So whatever they're talking about, and you can reduce this. It could be 1 minute, 45 seconds, 30 seconds, because really low-level learners cannot speak for 4 minutes. But they have the first partner and they share an answer to a question in 4 minutes. The next partner, 3 minutes. The next partner, 2 minutes. So there's just that little bit of pressure to finish more quickly. The interesting thing is the research on something on this specific activity shows that not only did the learners get more fluent, but they actually got more accurate. So this can help them in both categories, that little bit of pressure. And you can have a stopwatch or something and make it fun. Another sample fluency activity is a presentation. So also from like a dollar store, you can buy clips that are magnetic. And you can, if you have a couple of students, you can have them post their work and then have the other students go to them. So if you had a group of 6 or 7 students, you could have, maybe not 5, you could have 3 of them put their homework up or something that they've done in class up, and then they present. So the others come around and they talk. So this just encourages the presenter to do more talking, and it's fun. It's the same thing they might do sitting next to each other, but if you have a group, you make a couple of them the presenter and they share their homework. If they're comfortable with technology, you can have them record. So they can record and record and record and record, and then they could submit that recording to you using their phone. When I would do this with some of my learners, they'd say, oh, I practiced for an hour and a half before I felt good about the one that I sent to you. So if the library has like a listening lab or something, or computers where they could record something, they could also do that. But I'm like, that's great. You got an hour and a half of practice before you felt comfortable sending in your recording. Another fluency activity are picture stories, and you can find lots of picture stories, or you could draw your own, or I'll show you another way to use Canva on the next slide. So this one is one that was already out there. They have a lot of health related ones. And what this is the learner goes through and they tell you a story based on the pictures they're looking at. So just helping them to organize and to speak more fluently because they're following along with the story. Here's Canva storyboard. So you could create some of these picture stories. You could even have a blank storyboard and have the learners create their storyboard, and then you could enter them into Canva and print them out, which would be fun. There's a lot of already created game boards out there that help with fluency too. And you roll a dice and they go around the game board. So oftentimes they already exist. So if you're looking for that, or you could just have a blank game board template, and then you could put the topics that you've been covering in class or in your session there. Some other fluency activities, just repeat any activity. So that helps with fluency, and it's not boring. Learners need a lot of practice. Hot seat is where you call one student up and you ask them questions or have them in the hot seat. Concentric circles are talk lines. This is, you might have them talk to one person and then they move and they talk to the next person. So if you had 10, you could have 5 in the center and 5 on the outside, and they're facing each other. And then you clap your hands after 30 seconds, they move to the next person. So they're talking. When I've tutored really low level learners, this is really good to get them. They're practicing the same thing over and over and over again. And if you have an uneven number, you can join in too. Information gap activities, I already mentioned those. That's where with like the phone numbers where someone has information that the other one doesn't have. So anytime you can create a partner situation where one person has information the other doesn't have is helpful. Role plays, discussions, a jigsaw reading or listening. This is good for listening practice. This just means that this takes a little bit of technology, or you can read a portion of it and they have to listen, but only one person listens. So you have a group of 4. The first person listens to the first 30 seconds. The second person listens to the second 30 seconds, the third person, the third 30 seconds, and then they have to come together and share what they heard and try to reconstruct what they heard. Come to a consensus activities are always good for fluency or speaking, some kind of problem solving. So maybe there's lots of worksheets out there, like you can only save the life of 3 of these people, but there's 10 people. And so you have to negotiate who you're going to save. So you can find consensus building activities online. So for accuracy, we have fluency and we have accuracy. We want to introduce the grammar. We have a little section on grammar coming up. Help the students to notice it, have them model, repeat, and practice, and then provide them feedback. That's really important when we're talking about accuracy in speaking. The reason I bring this up in the speaking and listening is sometimes learners need correction. But if it's a fluency activity and we correct them too much, they start to feel afraid to talk. So we could tell ourselves, okay, for this, I'm not going to correct them. I'm just going to let them work on fluency. I might write down some common errors and I might help them with those later. But for an accuracy activity, I'm going to try to correct their errors, because without correction, they can start having patterns of saying something the wrong way. So they need that feedback. Some sample accuracy activities that you can do that are not related to teaching grammar are the find someone who. So if you give them the question or the way to answer, they're repeating the same question over and over again. And there's one there. Game boards, there's also a lot of accuracy activities where it gives you even a sentence frame and they have to say the same thing over and over again. Dialogues, like we would have created with the police officer and the driver, that's a dialogue. So they have a written dialogue that they repeat back and forth. Choral drills where the whole class repeats together or the whole group repeats together. Any kind of drill where the learners have something written down and they chant it. There's jazz chants. There's all kinds of drills that are out there. These are actually really good for accuracy, and they help learners to relax. They don't have to think about grammar so much. Actually, they're just repeating what they're saying, and that repetition helps them to memorize the language. And then you can bring dice into any grammar activity and make it a little bit more fun. Here's an example of a drill. This one is called expanding sentences, and it's actually a pronunciation drill because Spanish speakers struggle in English to differentiate between the B and the V sound. So this one has a lot of B's and V's. So we would go over how to pronounce the B sound versus the V sound. And then I might over exaggerate that I can put the teeth on the bottom lip and see those. So if I was actually doing this with my learners, I would say the sentence probably 2 times and show them the V sound. Vera is a teacher. They would repeat after me. Then I would say it again. They would repeat it after me. And then we're adding to the complexity of the sentence. So my sister Vera is a teacher. And then we add in some B words as we get to the end. So it gets to my older sister, Vera, is a very good high school biology teacher in Boston. So we're working on that V and B, but we've expanded the sentence. So you can create these based on what the learners are doing and just have them repeat after you, and also showing them more how sentences can be more complex. Okay, so we can also combine fluency and accuracy activities. This is a quick breakout room, 2-minute breakout room, where I want you to list as many or come up with as many ways to apologize as you can. So what words can you use to apologize? So I'm going to put you in your breakout rooms for just 2 minutes. Okay, so what are some of the ways that you came up with? You can add them in your chat for ways to apologize. I know I'm sorry, it was the first one we all came up with, but other ways. Ooh, I see some coming in the chat. My bad. I want to see Beth say that. Oh, pardon me. That's a good one. Please forgive me. My mistake. Oops. I'm really sorry. Oh, I love this. We have some really good ones coming in. Okay, so you can elicit these from your learners too. I think anytime we're doing anything, ask them what they know or what their ideas are first, and then build from what they already know. So then we could get into accuracy practice. So we could practice a dialogue, and you can write your own dialogue. Maybe you're tired of your students coming late. So you write this dialogue and you have them practice it. Or maybe this is too complex for your students or your learners, so you change this. But we could repeat it as a class together, then they could practice it with a partner. And again, all of the vocabulary and the grammar, it's all there and they're practicing it. So that's accuracy practice. And then our next step could be fluency practice. So I do talk lines and have little pieces of paper. And so let's say I had 8 learners. And so they're lined up across from each other, and they each have one of these little papers, and I can keep feeding new papers into the line. So at a party, person A spills Coke on person B's clothes. So they're going to have to apologize. And then you can't go to a friend's wedding, so apologize to your friend. So you could create all of these little scenarios, and then they have to practice apologizing. And then also, I wouldn't just stop at teaching how to apologize, but how to accept an apology too. Or what do you do when someone apologizes to you? So this would be the fluency practice with apologizing. A few more activities that you can use for helping your learners with speaking are continuums. So you can have a yes, no, or agree, disagree sign, and you can place them on different sides of the room if you have a few learners. Or if it's just one-on-one, you could just write them on a piece of paper and have them with their finger go across. And so they go, you ask a question and they go to that part of the room, or they show you where they are on that continuum. And then they have to explain why they're there. Again, just getting them up and out. Picture dictation is really fun. You show them a picture, and they one person sees the picture and they have to tell the other person how to draw it. So if you could especially find a picture or draw one yourself that has a lot of the vocabulary words that you've been learning or the content that you've been learning, that could be very fun. You can do find your match activities with famous people or with collocations. So it could be a verb and a noun that go together, and then they have to find each other and then create a sentence together. Class surveys where they stand up and survey everyone who's there, or other people out in the area if they're learning in a space where they can access other people. You could have a debate. We already talked about come to a consensus, and also discussion cards where you just hand out cards and have discussion questions on them. Some things that you can do for working on listening skills with beginners: listen to a word and then build a word list with a partner or with a small group. Readers theater, the teacher can tell a story, or the tutor can tell a story that they've written themselves even. And then the learners have roles in the story and they have to act them out. So you can, similar to TPR, the total physical response, you can see if they understood by if they do the activity. So this could be, we could go back to our police officer pulling us over, and I could say, okay, you're driver one, you're passenger one, you're the police officer, and then I tell the story and they act out what's happening. Listen and choose or point to objects on a handout or poster around the room for really low level learners. You just say, okay, I'm saying this word like boots, and they have to point to the boots, or we could play the slap again too. Listen and draw something. So you say the word, they have to draw it really quick. Follow a route on a map, anything where they have to listen and then do something. Show and tell is good for speaking and listening both. It's better for listening if you have the rest of the learners have some accountability to listen. So you say, okay, I'm going to ask you 3 questions when they're done sharing. So every time a different learner gets to bring something in and they get to talk about it. And then you can learn more about the learners in the group too. Simon Says, dictation, running dictation. This one, dictation is you say a word, they write it down, or you say a sentence, they write it down. Running dictation, you place yourself a little bit further away so they can't hear you unless they're close by. And then you have partners. So person A is the runner and person B is the writer. Person A has to run and listen to you repeating the same thing over and over again, and then go back and tell person B who's sitting there writing until they can construct the whole thing. It's maybe not appropriate for your groups, or maybe it would work. There's a lot of laughter that comes with it with adults. Presentations where you give them a little pressure to present something. Interviews, dictogloss, they listen 3 times to something. The first time they just listen, the second time they take notes, but they just record the keywords. under the keywords. Then the third time they can add details, and then they get together with a partner and they have to see if they can come up with word for word what was in the original, correct the text or lyrics. So you give them a short paragraph, let's say, and there's a bunch of mistakes in it, and then they have to figure out where the mistakes are as you read it out loud to them. And paradictation, which was like those telephone number ones where some have some of the information and the others have some of the information. Some listening resource websites that you can use. So if you want listenings to share with your learners, there's VOA, ESL, Randall's Listening Lab, ELO, and TED Talks, of course. TED Ed, I really like. There's others, but those are some places depending on the level of your students where you might find good listening resources. Okay, so we're going to switch to grammar as we have 2 more short sections. Hopefully we'll get through them all. So this is just to have you think about how you might like to learn. If you're trying to learn a new computer program, would you prefer A, to be told how to do it, B, to be shown how to do it, C, to read how to do it in the manual, D, to try using it and find out for yourself, E, a combination of these? So in the chat, tell me, what would you prefer? We got, no one really wants A. I haven't seen a lot of A's, lots of C's and combos. Interesting. Oh, yeah. My colleague at work would also be a C. And I am not. I'm a D, I think, most of the time. So you might think about if this is the same way you would like to study grammar. You can also ask your learners similar questions and see if they can figure out how they like to learn grammar best. Here's some thoughts that we might have about grammar. Grammar should be taught deductively, explicitly. Here's the grammar rule. Here's the language. This is what this grammar tense is. These are all the rules that go with this tense. Or the opposite of that would be discovery learning. Do you think grammar should be taught deductively? The second one, grammar explanations and technical terminology should be used in tutoring sessions. Tutors should correct the majority of learners' grammar errors, and grammar is scary to teach. Because we're running a little low on time, I'm not going to send us to the breakout room like I had planned. Which one of these do you say yes to? You have the strongest feeling about that you want to say yes, like yes, tutors should correct the majority of learners' errors, or yes, we should use technical terminology, that meta language in our sessions. Oh, there's lots coming in and I need to read them. Number 1, number 4, number 3. Okay, 2. Hard 4. Okay. We have a variety. That's good. Yeah. Okay. If you were a hard 4, don't be too afraid of grammar. You don't have to be a grammar expert to teach grammar in your sessions. Some of us have great grammar backgrounds, and others, maybe we don't have much of a foundation when it comes to teaching grammar, and that's okay. That's the same with our learners. We might have some learners who are coming from environments where they had a lot of grammar in school, and they can tell you the parts of speech. They can tell you all of the grammar. And then we might have others who don't even know the very basics. So we just attract a lot of different kinds of learners. One thing that we can do if you're afraid of grammar is don't worry so much about the meta language or the words that describe it, but teach chunks of language. So we naturally use grammar all of the time so that others understand us. And if we put those chunks together, like we talked about, put the verb with the noun, then that's going to help the learners. And this is a form of teaching grammar. If you notice that students are struggling or learners are struggling, look up, use Google. what are the rules that come with this grammar point? And you can ask Google, like, why do we say this, or why do we do that? And it'll come up with it. So you don't have to even have the grammar language. You can still find those rules, and you can share those rules with your students. You can also look at textbooks, because often our learners are struggling at the level that they're at, and there are textbooks that are specific to that level. There's two different ways to teach grammar. There's direct, which is, this is the grammar point, these are the rules, here's a chart. There's lots of charts with grammar. Or discovery, and this is where the learner has to discover it for themselves. So I'm going to show you an example of a way to teach grammar. Hopefully this is not intimidating. So for this one, what the students would do is they would circle any of the words that are about time. So days, months, seasons, they would circle it. So they would circle August 8th. They would circle 1982, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, 1:00 p.m., Thursday, summer, Sunday. You see them all in there. Then I would have them go back, and they could read this out loud with a partner if they wanted to and circle together, or they could do this individually. And they would then underline the word that comes before. So I checked and see if we all had the same words, and then they're going to underline. So if they circled August 8th, they would underline on, and we might do that first one together. Then I want them to tell me the rules. So below that, what words come before the following? So what comes before a time? So they would look up and see 1:00 p.m. circled, and before that, they would see at. So they would write the word at. What comes before a month? They would look and they would find October, and they would see, oh, the word before it is in. So they're noticing the rules for themselves. It's not intimidating when they notice the rules for themselves. So I don't tell them what it is. And we could do some practice activities, and then they could practice writing their sentences or answering using the correct words. So they still have all of this on one worksheet. I made these worksheets for you so you can see them. The other way to teach this would be just to tell them, we're going to look at prepositions of time today. And then you tell them the rules, and they see the examples. And then they do the practice where they have to just fill it in. You can combine the two. Neither is better. Both are good. So sometimes it's good to teach them the rules, and other times it's good to have them discover it. But I wanted you to see the two ways and what this looks like. And again, you have these worksheets so you can see it. Some things to remember with grammar. Our learners are working on a lot of different grammar structures at the same time, and it might look like they've reverted or they're losing ground. And this is just the natural process of, okay, they're trying out new things and they're getting information. It's a gradual process. A lot of it is happening under the surface. I found with my own learning of language that I would learn something and it wouldn't really come out in my speech for a couple months. And then it was there. Learners overgeneralize a lot, so they make a lot of mistakes. And we need to encourage them to try out language and to make those mistakes, because they won't advance unless they're making those mistakes. It's called inner language. It's really healthy. They're seeing what the limits are, and they're seeing if they can do certain things with language. So really help them to feel comfortable with making mistakes. If you're going to teach a new grammar point, try to connect it to something that they already know, something easier, and then contrast the new grammar point with something that they've already mastered. That's going to help them to have a point of comparison and to make it easier. And just remember, learners need lots and lots and lots of practice. That should be our theme for the day, right? For everything, they need a lot of practice. There's a grammar video there that does a pretty good job. It's a textbook advertisement, but you can watch it later if you would like. When teaching grammar, get yourself a resource book or use the internet. There are great ones, great websites out there. There are lots of worksheets you can just print out. So if you don't feel super confident about it, you can find them. I gave you some. You'll have this presentation that you can go and find some, and you might know others. Here's an example using a textbook. So I had a sample chapter that I used. So if you do have a textbook, still don't rely just on the textbook activities. I would still first elicit, what do my students already know? What do my learners already know? And so this one's going to be about occupation. So I asked them to share all of the different occupations that they know. Then I give them 2 short stories. The focus of this grammar is simply past tense was. So they have a bunch of activities in the Ventures textbook on was, but I give them an example where I share and they can listen to me talk about it. And then I give them a second example and I ask them comprehension questions about the examples. And then I ask them what verb is used most often in the 2 examples. So I'm helping them to notice the grammar. And then I ask them, are we talking about now? Are we talking about the past? So they're noticing the word was over and over and over again. And then I'm contrasting what they already know, which is present, with the past, with was and were. And so they go ahead and fill that out. They do a couple of practice activities from the book out loud. So this is if you have a textbook, because I know in the previous session, someone had asked about if textbooks were good. But don't limit yourself to just the textbook, because all it would be was a couple of practice activities. Then I have them write their sentences and then they'll read their sentences. They'll use 2 wases and am in this. So again, they're practicing the grammar, and it's not that complicated. And then they move on to asking questions. What was your first job? And they go around and they ask the other learners about it. So that's an example of how you can put a grammar lesson together. Don't feel intimidated by grammar. You don't have to have all the answers. You can always say, well, let's look that up. And then you find the answer and you can share it with them. So we're down to our last few minutes. So I'm going to give you a few tips for when you're planning sessions. If you're looking at sessions, I think it's easier to plan 3 or 4 together in a theme or a unit to take pressure off of you. You can find all of the resources and they can build together. Try to connect what you're planning with what the learners actually need, which might be language, it might be culture information that they're struggling with. And then you can also have a set routine. So we always warm up and do a small talk. We might do our idiom of the day. Then I introduce some new language. This might be a grammar point or vocabulary. Then we practice it. And then I try to give them some between session tasks to work on. So here's an example about complaining. So complaining, like apologizing, really useful. And this doesn't mean just complaining like I had a bad day, but it's more when I have a problem, like in my apartment complex with the landlord or something. So I might ask them, write the word complain, ask them, what does complain mean? And then I have a dictionary definition there. Ask them to share what they've complained about recently, like maybe their children not washing the dishes. And we write some of those up on the board. Now, this could give me ideas for future sessions too. Okay, so today we're going to focus on one aspect of complaining, but then in the future we can do others. I have them, like we did with apologizing, write down how the words you can use to complain. And this is really good. When we share them, I can give them all kinds of pointers about what is more polite language and what's less polite language. So this also takes you considering how do we complain and what's the right way to complain. So then I might have them focus in on something like housing complaints. So the rent's increasing, the neighbors are too loud, the sink is broken. And then for the fourth one, they can create their own. This especially might help them to identify something that they're currently facing. And then we could do a short reading if you have intermediate level learners, there's a sample reading there. Or I could just introduce some rules about how to complain. Since we don't have time, I won't go through them. And it's not just introducing about how to respond to a complaint. And then we can create those conversations together, just choosing one of them, like with a neighbor who's being too loud, if maybe that's the one that they connected with, or with a landlord who's doing something. Once we've created the conversation together, we can fix the grammar together and, excuse me, change the language to being more polite. So write what they say and then fix it as you need to. In partners, they practice it, and then they create another scenario, or they create another dialogue based on one of the scenarios. And then they role play that for the whole group. So the first one we might have done, the landlord's increasing the rent or not fixing the sink. The second one, it might be the neighbor, and we focus on that one. And then have them do something between sessions. So you can look at this in a little bit more detail. What I wanted to show you is I can take something my learners are dealing with on a daily basis, and we can spend an hour and a half on this with no resources needed other than the learners and their lives and our knowledge of English. And then they can transfer this to what they need. So if you're looking for other resources, I listed a few here. There's tons of good resources out there for free online. Use textbooks to get ideas. If your library or where you're working or tutoring out of might have some resource textbooks, and you can flip through those and get some ideas too. If you're not sure about the level of your students, a really simple way is, with really low beginners, you don't have to do this, but if they're a little bit higher, if the learners look at a page of text and they don't know 10 of the words on the page, it's too hard for them. So even like 7 or 8 is probably too high level. So that might be an easy way to see if the textbook is too high level. Okay, so we're at the end with 3 minutes left. Any quick questions in the chat? I know we have an evaluation coming, but we could look at 1 or 2 questions before that. How much time should a tutor take prepping weekly? Hopefully, if you have good resources, you can prep in a half hour or so. Like I said, for me, I like to prep for a few sessions at once. So maybe I spend an hour or 2, but then I'm ready for a number of sessions. I think it depends on your setting. Oh, yeah. So if the learners know a lot of grammar, yeah, Bev's right. If you're new, the first time it might take you a few hours for one session, and then hopefully it gets faster after that. If your learners know a lot of grammar and you don't, it's okay. You can just say, all right, let's look it up, or you tell me. And then the thing is, learners might know the language, but they don't know how to use it. And so you're the expert in how to use it. So lean into that. You can say, okay, you show me an example of this term that you're using, and then I can build some activities out of that. Yeah, maybe you can offer a crash grammar workshop for tutors and help them develop a cheat sheet. This is a good idea too. And you can also just ask Google, what is this? And it'll tell you really quickly, and it'll tell you the rules, and you can work on those together. I think we just feel intimidated by grammar sometimes. All right, well, you have the link to the survey, and I hope you'll fill that out. Thanks so much for coming. And I hope you'll have the slides and a number of handouts that I screenshotted in here so you can hopefully use these.